My daughter-in-law slapped me at her wedding for refusing to give her my $450,000 house, so I canceled everything. They say a wedding is the happiest day of a family's life. A celebration of love, of new beginnings, of everything you built coming together in one perfect moment. But on the day my daughter-in-law married my son, she pulled me into a side room, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Sign the deed over. You're old, you're alone, you don't need it anymore." When I told her no, she slapped me so hard I stumbled backward into the wall. My son was standing 10 feet away. He said nothing. He did nothing, he just stared. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I smoothed my jacket, walked out of that room, and before midnight, I had made one phone call that erased everything I had spent $80,000 building for them. The flowers, the venue, the catering, the live band, all of it gone. What happened next? You have to stay with me to believe it. But first, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. We love knowing where our community is joining us from. For 37 years, I worked as a licensed structural engineer for the city of Harrowfield. 37 years reviewing building permits, signing off on load-bearing walls, calculating the exact amount of weight a foundation could hold before it cracked. 37 years of precision, of responsibility, of understanding that what you build only stands if you lay the groundwork correctly. I used to joke that I knew more about foundations than most people ever would. What I didn't realize was that I had spent decades building a foundation for a family that would one day try to pull it out from under me. My husband, Robert, passed away 11 years ago. A sudden cardiac event. Here one morning, gone by noon. We had 31 years together, and in that time we built everything from nothing. The house on Callaway Ridge, the savings account, the retirement fund, the life. When Robert died, I had two choices. I could fall apart or I could keep building. I chose to keep building because my son Marcus was only 24 years old, still trying to find his footing, and someone had to hold steady. I was that someone. Marcus was never an easy child, but he was a good one. Sensitive, thoughtful, the kind of boy who cried at the end of movies and pretended he had something in his eye. After Robert died, Marcus and I developed a rhythm. Sunday dinners at my house on Callaway Ridge. His favorite roasted chicken with lemon and rosemary, the same recipe his father used to request every week. We would sit at the kitchen table for hours sometimes, just talking about his week, about my projects, about nothing in particular. Those Sundays were the scaffolding of our relationship. Quiet, solid, dependable. Then he met Danielle. He called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying a particular kind of brightness I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager. "Mom, I met someone. She's remarkable. She's not like anyone I've ever known." I remember smiling into the phone, genuinely happy for him. Every mother wants her child to find love. I asked the usual questions. How did they meet? What does she do? Is she kind to you? He answered them all enthusiastically, and by the end of the call, I was already looking forward to meeting her. The first time Danielle came to Sunday dinner, she arrived 40 minutes late with a single bottle of grocery store wine and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was beautiful in a very deliberate way, the kind of beautiful that requires significant maintenance and effort, and she knew it. She held Marcus's hand the entire evening and spoke mostly about herself. Her career in luxury real estate. Her family's vacation home in the Carolinas. The apartment she and Marcus were considering in the Whitmore district, which she described as nothing special, but it'll do for now. I smiled and passed the rosemary chicken and said all the right things. But I noticed that she never once asked me about my work, never asked about Robert, never asked how I was managing the house alone since his passing. She looked around my kitchen the way a buyer looks around a property she's considering, taking inventory. I told myself I was imagining things. Over the following months, the Sunday dinners grew irregular. First it was Danielle has a showing on Sunday mornings. Then it was we're having brunch with her parents this week. Mom, you understand. Then it was just silence, weeks passing without a visit, until I learned to set only one plate on the kitchen table and stop making the rosemary chicken altogether because it felt too large for one person. When Marcus and Danielle announced their engagement, I cried. Real tears, happy ones. I pulled Marcus into a hug and told him I was so proud of the man he had become. Danielle stood slightly behind him with her arms crossed, watching the moment the way you watch something that doesn't quite belong to you. When they asked for help with the wedding, I didn't pause for even a moment. Of course, whatever you need, that was always my answer when it came to Marcus. Always. I liquidated a significant portion of my retirement investments. I cashed in bonds, Robert, and I had accumulated over decades. I contributed $80,000 to the wedding budget without being asked twice, because a mother doesn't need to be asked twice. I handled the venue deposit for Harrowfield Manor, a restored 19th century estate with gardens and a ballroom that seated 250. I coordinated with the caterers, the floral designer, the string quartet, the photographer who had shot 3 covers of regional lifestyle magazines. I paid for the honeymoon flights to Portugal and the hotel in Lisbon that Danielle had selected from a travel magazine and bookmarked on her phone. I did all of this because I believed that love, real love, is expressed in action. And because I hoped that after the wedding, when we were officially a family, Danielle might finally let me in. I was so profoundly naive. The rehearsal dinner was held at Harrowfield Manor the evening before the ceremony. I arrived early, as I always do, carrying a small arrangement of white peonies from my garden, tied with a simple ribbon. A welcome to the family gesture, something from my hands to hers. The manor was breathtaking that evening. Candlelight reflected off the polished mahogany floors. The florist had draped white and ivory arrangements over every archway. The caterers I had hired moved with quiet efficiency, circulating hors d'oeuvres and champagne among the arriving guests. Everything was exactly as we had planned it. Everything was, if I may say so, beautiful. It had all come from my savings. But watching Marcus walk through the candlelit ballroom with the particular brightness of a man in love, I felt every dollar had been worth it. Danielle's event coordinator, a polished woman named Priya who I had hired at Danielle's specific request, found me near the entrance and shook my hand warmly. "Everything looks stunning, Mrs. Calloway. The floral arrangements are exactly what Danielle wanted. You've outdone yourself." "I just want them to be happy," I said. Priya's expression shifted slightly, the way a person's face shifts when they know something you don't. She recovered quickly, smiled professionally, and moved on. I noticed Danielle holding court near the garden terrace with her family and friends, a champagne flute in one hand and the effortless authority of someone who considers every room her territory. Her mother, a stiff-postured woman dripping in gold jewelry, was pointing at various corners of the ballroom with the critical eye of someone who had paid for none of it and found fault with most of it. I found my seat at the rehearsal dinner table. I had been placed at the far end, beside Marcus's distant cousin Terence and Terence's new girlfriend, neither of whom I had ever met. The head table, where Marcus and Danielle sat surrounded by their inner circle, was across the room. I watched my son from that distance the entire evening and thought, he doesn't notice I'm not near him. Not once did he look across the room to find me. After dessert, as some guests were beginning to say their goodbyes, Danielle appeared at my elbow. "Elinor, can I speak with you privately?" Her voice was warm. Deliberately warm, the way a salesperson's voice is warm when they're about to pitch something expensive. "Of course," I said. She led me down a corridor away from the main ballroom, toward a private sitting room off the manor's east wing. The music and laughter faded behind us. The only sound was our heels on the hardwood floor and the distant murmur of the evening. She closed the door. "Tomorrow is going to be such a meaningful day," she began, turning to face me with a smile I had never seen on her before. Too wide, too bright. The beginning of everything for Marcus and me. "I'm so happy for you both," I said honestly. "That's why I wanted to talk to you tonight." She clasped her hands together, as if she had rehearsed this. "Marcus and I have been doing a lot of thinking about our future, about what we want it to look like, and there's an opportunity that's come up that we'd be foolish not to consider." I waited. The Alderton properties on the west side of the city. You may have seen the development in the news. Luxury townhomes, gated, exceptional investment value. She paused. "We want a secure one, but the down payment is substantial." "How substantial?" I asked, though something in my chest had already begun to tighten. "Well, that's the thing." Danielle tilted her head. Your house on Callaway Ridge. Marcus told me it appraised recently, $450,000, fully paid off, no mortgage, prime location. She let that number sit in the air between us like smoke. We thought it would be the perfect gift. You sign it over, we use the equity to secure the Alderton property, and you downsize into something more appropriate. Something easier to manage at your age. We'd help you find it, of course. The room was very quiet. You want me to give you my house, I said. The words came out slowly, each one a separate stone. We want you to recognize that it makes more sense in our hands than yours. You're alone, Elinor. You're rattling around in a 4-bedroom house by yourself. It's impractical. That house is where I raised Marcus, where Robert and I spent 30 years, where I have memories. Her voice cooled by several degrees. Yes, but memories don't require 4 bedrooms and a 2-car garage. You can take the memories with you anywhere. I looked at her steadily. Danielle, I am not giving you my house. The smile disappeared. I'm sorry. I said no, that house is my home. It is the only substantial asset I have. I will not sign it over. The silence that followed was absolute and electric. I could hear faint music from the ballroom, impossibly distant. Danielle stared at me with an expression I had never seen on a human face directed at me, not cold exactly, but something hotter than that. Something barely contained. Elinor, her voice had dropped to something very quiet and very dangerous. You need to think very carefully. Marcus is your only child. We are his family now, and a family. I have been family to Marcus for 43 years, I said. Don't lecture me about family. You are a selfish, stubborn old woman who doesn't know when to let go. Danielle, lower your voice. Do not tell me what to do. I heard footsteps in the corridor. Someone was approaching. I opened my mouth to say something measured, something that might de-escalate what had become a dangerous situation, and then I saw her arm move. The slap landed with a sound like a door slamming shut. The impact drove me sideways into the wall. My shoulder caught the plaster, and I caught myself with one hand, steadying my balance. The left side of my face burned with a heat that radiated all the way to my jaw. I tasted something copper where I had bitten the inside of my cheek. The door to the sitting room had opened during the strike. Standing in the doorway, wide-eyed and frozen, was Priya the coordinator. Behind her, 2 of Danielle's bridesmaids, and behind them, having apparently heard the commotion and come running, was Marcus. My son. He stood in that doorway and looked at me, hand braced against the wall, face red with the force of his fiancée's palm. He looked at Danielle. He looked back at me. His mouth opened slightly. He said nothing. Nothing. He stood there the way a man stands when he is choosing, very deliberately, not to choose. His eyes moved between us like a spectator at a match he had no stake in. I straightened up slowly. I adjusted my jacket. I looked at Danielle for one long, quiet moment, and I looked at my son for one longer, quieter one. Good night, I said. I walked past all of them. Through the corridor, into the ballroom, past the glittering candlelight and the champagne flutes and the flowers I had paid for. I retrieved my coat and my bag from the cloakroom attendant with a polite thank you. I said a brief goodbye to the 2 guests who caught my eye on my way out. I walked to my car in the Manor's gravel parking lot, sat in the driver's seat, and locked the doors. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. But I was not crying. Not yet. Not because I wasn't hurt. I was, in ways that had nothing to do with my face, but because I already knew, with the clarity of someone who has spent a career understanding what holds things together and what tears them apart, exactly what I was going to do. The drive home to Callaway Ridge took 22 minutes. I made it in 20. The house was exactly as I had left it, dark and familiar, smelling of the lemon oil I used on the furniture and the faint residue of the rosemary from last week's dinner. I turned on the kitchen light and sat at the table where Marcus and I had spent so many Sunday evenings, and I opened the drawer where I kept my organized folder of vendor contracts. Every contract, every phone number, every payment receipt. Priya had given me copies of everything when we began the planning process 8 months ago, because I was the one doing the paying, and she was the one who understood what that meant legally. I looked at my watch. It was 11:47 at night. I picked up the phone. Priya, I said when she answered on the second ring, her voice alert with the particular alertness of someone who had been expecting a call. I saw what happened tonight. Are you all right? I'm fine, I told her, but I need to talk to you about tomorrow. A careful pause. Of course, what do you need, Mrs. Calloway? I need to cancel everything. The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. Everything. Everything that is contracted in my name, the venue booking, the catering, the floral arrangements, the string quartet, the photographer, the transportation, all of it. Mrs. Calloway, her voice was professional and measured. The ceremony is in 14 hours. There are guests already at the Harrowfield Inn who came from out of state. The vendors are all on call for a 5:30 a.m. setup. I understand that, and I'm asking you to cancel all of it. I reviewed my contracts with you when we signed them, Priya. Do I have the right to cancel with 14 hours notice? Another pause. I could hear pages turning. Yes, the cancellation clause requires 12 hours minimum notice. You're within your rights. Then please begin making the calls tonight. Some deposits are non-refundable. I know, whatever is lost is lost. That is my decision to make. Priya exhaled slowly. May I ask why? I told her, plainly, without embellishment, the request, the refusal, the slap, my son's silence. When I finished, Priya was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Calloway, she said finally, I'll start making the calls right now. The venue first, then the catering, then the others. I'll handle it. Thank you, Priya. For what it's worth, and I know it may not be worth much right now, I think you're absolutely doing the right thing. I thanked her again and hung up. Then I made myself a cup of tea, sat back down at the kitchen table under the warm yellow light, and began crossing names out of the vendor folder one by one, slowly and methodically, the way I used to mark completed line items on a structural review. Precise. Final. Irreversible. At 12:40 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Marcus. Mom, what have you done? His voice was frantic in the way of someone who has just received several phone calls in rapid succession and doesn't yet understand what connects them. Hello, Marcus, how are you? Don't do that. Priya just called us. She says you've canceled everything. The venue, the catering, all of it. Mom, the wedding is in the morning. There are 250 guests. The guests will have a lovely Saturday morning at no charge to them. This is insane. You cannot cancel your own son's wedding. I'm not canceling your wedding, Marcus. I'm canceling my payments. If you want to get married tomorrow, you're welcome to. You'll simply need to find your own funding. Everything is already arranged. Everything is already in place. The whole thing falls apart without the venue. Then perhaps, I said carefully, you and Danielle should have considered that before she struck me. Silence. A long, stretched-out silence in which I could hear Danielle's voice in the background, urgent and sharp, asking what was happening. Mom, she was nervous. She wasn't herself. The pressure of the wedding. Marcus, my voice was quiet and very steady. I need you to hear what you just said to me. Your fiancé struck me, and your explanation is that she was nervous. I'm not defending it, I'm just... You are defending it. That is precisely what you're doing. And what you're not doing, what you did not do tonight, is defend me. More silence. Then Danielle must have taken the phone, because the next voice I heard was hers, shrill and cracking at the edges. Alina, you cannot do this. This is my wedding. This is my day. You can't take this from me because of one. Good night, Danielle, I said. I hung up, walked to the wall, and unplugged the landline. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was distressed, but because I was, for the first time in months, completely awake. By 7 the next morning, the calls had started again on my mobile. Marcus, Danielle's mother, Rosalind, a woman I had met 3 times and found deeply unpleasant on all 3 occasions. Alina, Rosalind said, when I made the mistake of answering. I am calling because this has gone far enough. Danielle is devastated. Marcus is destroyed. There are guests at the Harrowfield Inn who drove 4 hours yesterday. Good morning, Rosalind. Don't good morning me. You know what your daughter-in-law did was wrong. We all know it. But you cannot blow up a wedding over one moment of. Your daughter asked me to surrender the deed to my home, I said. My home? A property worth $450,000. When I declined, she struck me, in front of witnesses, while my son watched and said nothing. Which part of that situation do you feel I've overreacted to? Rosalind was quiet. I didn't realize she had asked you for the house, she said finally, in a slightly different register. Now you do. I ended the call and went for a walk. The neighborhood around Callaway Ridge was peaceful in the early Saturday morning light. The couple 3 houses down were walking their terrier. The retired professor on the corner was retrieving his newspaper from the driveway in his bathrobe. A child was riding a bicycle with slightly lopsided determination up and down the cul-de-sac. Everything was ordinary and quiet and achingly normal. I walked for 40 minutes and came home feeling cleaner than I had in weeks. Marcus was sitting on my front steps. He was wearing the dress shirt he had planned to be married in, untucked, the collar open, his hair uncombed. He looked like a man who had not slept and had been crying recently and was trying very hard to look like neither was true. "Mom," he said. "Hello, Marcus. Can we talk?" I sat down beside him on the steps. The same steps where I had sat with him the evening Robert died, both of us too stunned to go inside. Some conversations only happen outside, in the open air, where there's no ceiling to trap them. "Do you know why I did this?" I asked. "Because Danielle hit you." "Before that?" He looked at me. "What do you mean?" "Do you know what she asked me last night? Before the slap, before any of it?" I watched his face as I told him. The house on Callaway Ridge. The deed. The $450,000. The suggestion that I was too old to need the space. Marcus's expression moved through several phases: confusion, disbelief, and then something more uncomfortable than either. "Marcus," I said, "did you know she was going to ask me?" He looked at the driveway for a long time. "Not in those exact words," he finally said. "But in some words. We'd talked about the Alderton property. And I may have mentioned that the house would eventually, that someday it would. That someday it would be yours." He didn't answer, he didn't need to. "When Danielle told you she was going to ask me directly, what did you say to her?" "I told her you wouldn't go for it." "But you didn't tell her it was wrong to ask." Silence. "You didn't tell her this house means more to me than money. You didn't tell her that your father and I built that life together and it is not a transaction. You simply told her I wouldn't agree." "Mom, And then when she struck me, you stood there." Marcus put his face in his hands. We sat on the steps for several minutes without speaking. A bird moved through the branches of the oak tree at the edge of the yard, the one Robert had planted the year Marcus was born. "What do you want me to say?" Marcus asked finally. "I want you to tell me the truth. Did you believe you had a right to this house?" A very long pause. I thought that when you were older, when you couldn't manage it alone anymore, I thought it would naturally come to us. When I was older, you and Danielle were simply accelerating the timeline." He flinched. "Marcus, I am 68 years old and in excellent health. I have a career I'm proud of, a home I love, and a life that is entirely my own. The fact that I live alone does not mean I am diminished. It does not mean my home is available. And it does not mean I owe you anything beyond what I have already freely chosen to give." He raised his head and looked at me with the expression he used to have as a teenager, when he knew he was wrong about something important and hadn't yet figured out how to admit it. "I'm going to go inside now," I said, standing. "You're welcome to sit here as long as you need to." "Mom." I paused. "I'm sorry, not for the wedding. I mean, I'm sorry about that too, but I'm sorry for not standing up for you, when it mattered." I looked at my son for a long moment. "I know," I said, "and I hope you'll think carefully about what that means." I went inside and closed the door gently behind me. That afternoon, I called my attorney, a woman named Claudette Harris who had been Robert's colleague and who had handled our estate planning when he was diagnosed with his heart condition years before he died. I told her what had happened, all of it, from the request to the slap to Marcus's admission on the front steps. "How do you want to proceed?" Claudette asked, her voice carrying the particular calm of someone who has heard extraordinary things and chosen not to be rattled by them. "I want to revise everything," I said. "The will, The power of attorney, all of it. I want Marcus to understand that his inheritance is not a given, that my choices about my own estate are mine to make, and that there are consequences to how he has treated me. We can disinherit him partially or fully for cause, Claudette said. This state recognizes egregious mistreatment and neglect of duty as grounds. I don't want to erase him completely, I said, but I want him to earn what he receives, and I want him to know it. Claudette came to the house the following Wednesday with a stack of documents and a steady hand. Together, we revised my will to reduce Marcus's share to the statutory minimum unless he met a specific set of conditions. A formal written apology, delivered to me in the presence of a neutral third party. Joint counseling with Danielle, verified by a licensed therapist, for a period of no less than 1 year. And a demonstrated period of 12 months in which he treated me as, in Claudette's precise legal language, a full and autonomous individual with independent rights over her own property and decisions. The balance of my estate, should those conditions not be met, would go to an organization I had already begun researching. A legal advocacy nonprofit serving women over 60 in financial and family disputes. When Claudette sent Marcus his copy, he called me 4 minutes after receiving it. "Mom, are you serious?" "Completely. Therapy, written apologies, this is humiliating. More or less humiliating than being struck by your fiancé while your son watched." A long pause. "What happens if I meet the conditions?" "You receive what the will specifies, and we rebuild our relationship on honest ground." "And if I don't?" "Then the foundation receives your share and does something good with it." Another long silence. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "Take all the time you need." I hung up, poured myself a glass of wine I had been saving for an occasion I couldn't have predicted, and sat on the back porch of the house on Callaway Ridge as the sun went down over the ridge and painted everything amber and rose. It was, I realized, the first evening in months that I had sat outside simply to exist. Not to plan, not to coordinate, not to manage someone else's life. Simply to be here, in my own house, on my own terms, with the feeling of someone who has finally, after a very long time, told the truth. 6 months passed. The house on Callaway Ridge is still mine. I haven't sold it. I have, however, repainted the back porch, replaced the garden furniture, and converted Marcus's old room into the studio I always told myself I'd set up when I had time. I had time. I began painting again. Watercolors mostly, landscapes from memory. The coastline where Robert and I took our first vacation, the ridge at sunset, the oak tree in the front yard in winter. My neighbor, a retired art teacher named Frances, saw them through the window one afternoon and knocked to ask who had made them. When I told her, she insisted I join the informal group she hosted at her kitchen table on Thursday evenings. I went once out of politeness and have not missed a Thursday since. Marcus called on a Tuesday evening in the 4th month, his voice carrying something I hadn't heard in it before. Not the frantic urgency of the night of the cancellations. Something quieter. "Mom, I want to tell you something." "Go ahead." "Danielle and I are not getting married. Not right now, maybe not ever. We've been in therapy, separate therapy, and I've been doing a lot of thinking, about myself, about the ways I've behaved, and I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Not because of the will, because it was wrong." I was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for telling me that, Marcus. The therapist asked me something last week. She asked if I had ever thought of you as a whole person, separate from being my mother. And he paused. I didn't have a good answer. "No," I agreed gently. "You didn't. I'm working on it. I know, I can hear it." We talked for an hour that evening. Not about the wedding or the will or the house. About his work, which he'd been neglecting. About Robert, whom he'd been thinking about more lately. About a hiking trip he was considering, something he'd never done, something outside the life he and Danielle had been building together. "Can I come for dinner sometime?" he asked near the end of the call. "Not to talk about any of this, just dinner." "Sunday," I said. "Rosemary chicken, I'll make extra." He came on Sunday. He came the following Sunday too. We are not where we were. But I'm not sure I want to go back to where we were, because where we were was a place where I set one place at the table and called it enough. Where I financed someone else's life and called it love. where I stood still and called it patience. What I want is something I haven't had in years, maybe ever. A relationship with my son that is built on honesty. On his seeing me as a leaner, a person, not just as his mother, a function. We are building that, slowly, on better ground. Last month, I was contacted by a journalist writing a piece on older women and financial autonomy within families. Someone who had heard a version of my story through the vendor network. Apparently, Priya had told the caterer, who had told his wife, who had told a friend. I didn't give an interview, but the journalist's inquiry made me think. There are so many women in this situation. Women who have spent decades constructing something, a home, a savings account, a life, and who find themselves pressured, manipulated, or simply discarded when that something becomes valuable to someone who didn't build it. I called Claudette. "I've been thinking about the foundation," I said. "Tell me more." We met the following week. Frances joined us at the kitchen table with her coffee and her straight-talking manner and her 30 years of watching people navigate difficult relationships. The Callaway Foundation is now registered as a nonprofit. It exists to provide legal consultation, financial guidance, and emotional support to women over 60 managing family financial conflicts. We are small. 3 volunteers, a shared office space, and a website that Claudette's college-age nephew built in a weekend. Last week, we received our 7th inquiry. A woman in her mid-70s. Her son and daughter-in-law had been asking her to co-sign a loan. She had declined twice. They had stopped speaking to her for 4 months and then returned, warmer than before, asking again. She wanted to know, am I wrong to feel afraid of my own family? I wrote back to her myself. No asterisk, I told her. You are not wrong, you are paying attention. And paying attention to how people treat you, that is not selfishness, that is survival. I don't know exactly what comes next. The foundation will grow or it won't. Marcus and I will rebuild our relationship, or we will arrive, with time and honesty, at something better than what we had before. The oak tree in the front yard will keep growing regardless. What I know is this. I built a career on understanding foundations, on knowing what holds weight and what doesn't, on recognizing the difference between a wall that is load-bearing and a wall that is merely decorative. For years, I let people treat me like a decorative wall. Something pleasant, useful for appearances, but not something you'd worry about if it came down. I am not a decorative wall. I am the foundation. And the foundation, it turns out, is doing just fine.